Today is May 9th, 2026, the 81st anniversary of the Soviet Union's victory over Nazi Germany. The day that Vladimir Putin has built an entire political mythology around. The day he has used year after year to justify a war, to project strength, to tell the Russian people and the watching world that Russia is unconquerable. Today is Victory Day. And today, for the first time since 2008, there are no tanks on Red Square, no ballistic missile carriers, no rows of armored vehicles, no weapons of any kind rolling over the same cobblestones where Soviet generals once stood to receive the Nazi surrender flags. Just soldiers, marching on foot, in a stripped-down parade that Russia's defense ministry described, with no apparent irony, as a response to the current operational situation. And what is the current operational situation? Ukraine's drones can reach Moscow, and Vladimir Putin needs Volodymyr Zelensky's permission to hold his own parade. Let that land, not metaphorically, not rhetorically, literally, legally, formally, with GPS coordinates listed in a signed presidential decree. Last night, the president of Ukraine issued an official government document stating that the territory of Red Square, and it listed the coordinates, 4 precise latitude-longitude points encompassing the square where Putin stood this morning, would be temporarily excluded from Ukraine's operational weapons plan for the duration of the parade. Zelensky gave Putin permission to celebrate his country's greatest historical victory in his own capital city. And in exchange, he got 1,000 Ukrainian prisoners of war back home. This is the story of May 9th, 2026. Not a Russian triumph, a Ukrainian negotiation. To understand how extraordinary today is, you have to understand what Victory Day has represented in Putin's Russia. It is not simply a commemoration. In every other country that observes VE Day, Britain, France, the Netherlands, May 8th or 9th is a solemn day of remembrance. Flags at half-mast, moments of silence, flowers at war memorials. In Putin's Russia, Victory Day is a demonstration of living power. It is the day the Kremlin says to the world, "We defeated the greatest military machine in history in 1945, and we are still here. Still strong, still capable of doing it again." The parade was the proof. Tanks rumbling over Red Square, intercontinental ballistic missile carriers rolling under the Kremlin walls, soldiers who had fought in Ukraine, Putin's war, marching in the shadow of Lenin's tomb. Every year the message was the same. Russia cannot be defeated. Russia will not be defeated. Russia has never been defeated. Putin has staked more of his personal political legitimacy on that message than on any other single narrative. It is the spine of his entire worldview, the line of continuity he draws from Soviet sacrifice in World War II to Russian sacrifice in Ukraine today. The reason he has spent years calling the Kyiv government neo-Nazis and framing his invasion as a continuation of the Great Patriotic War. Victory Day is not a holiday in Russia, it is a state religion. And today, its central sacrament, the parade of military power, could not be performed, because the tanks that would have rolled through Red Square are in Ukraine. And the drones that Ukraine can now build and fly at ranges that reach the Russian capital mean that parking those tanks anywhere near Moscow is an invitation to watch them burn on live television. The drone problem. Why the tanks are gone. Russia's defense ministry announced the change in format in late April, citing the current operational situation. The language was deliberately vague, but every defense analyst in every capital understood exactly what it meant. Over the past 18 months, Ukraine has developed and deployed long-range FPV and strike drone capabilities that have fundamentally altered the geographic reach of the war. Ukrainian drones have struck oil refineries in the Krasnodar region, energy infrastructure in Pskov, more than 900 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, manufacturing plants in Tatarstan, and in recent months, with increasing accuracy and frequency, they have reached the Moscow metropolitan area, including in several incidents, points within the Moscow city limits itself. The calculus for the Victory Day parade was brutal in its simplicity. A column of tanks rolling through Red Square is the most valuable drone target in Russia. A single successful Ukrainian strike on that formation, broadcast live on Russian state television, replayed around the world in seconds, would not just damage equipment, it would shatter in one moment the central narrative of Putin's 25-year rule. It would make the invincible Russia of Victory Day mythology look exactly like what it is. A country whose military hardware has to be hidden from its own citizens on its most important national holiday, because the enemy has the reach and the will to destroy it. Russia's defense ministry made the correct military decision. It was also the most symbolically devastating decision they have ever made. And Zelenskyy noticed. Earlier this week, before the ceasefire was announced, he said publicly that Russia's decision to hold the parade without military equipment was because the Kremlin fears drones may buzz over Red Square. He said it plainly as a statement of fact. And then, in a move of breathtaking strategic theater, he went one step further. He didn't just mock the empty parade, he offered to authorize it. He signed the decree, he listed the coordinates, he made it official. Ukraine is permitting Russia to celebrate Victory Day. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov called it a silly joke. He said, "We don't need anyone's permission to be proud of our Victory Day." But Russia had already moved its tanks. Peskov's words were the denial of a man who knows the point has already landed. The decree is not a military document. It is a psychological operation of the highest order. Zelenskyy took Russia's most sacred day and turned it into a transaction, something Ukraine controls, something Ukraine can grant or withhold. He made Victory Day into a Ukrainian concession. You cannot undo that. The 3-day ceasefire, what Trump brokered. The formal framework around today's parade is a 3-day ceasefire announced by President Trump on Truth Social yesterday evening. I am pleased to announce that there will be a 3-day ceasefire May 9th, 10th, and 11th in the war between Russia and Ukraine, Trump posted. He said the request was made directly by him and that both Putin and Zelenskyy had agreed. Russian presidential aide Yuri Ushakov confirmed the arrangement, saying it had been reached through U.S. intermediaries following the recent Trump-Putin phone call in which the two leaders discussed the possibility of a ceasefire around Victory Day commemorations. Trump also announced that the ceasefire would include a prisoner exchange, 1,000 Ukrainian prisoners from Russian custody, 1,000 Russian prisoners from Ukrainian custody, on May 9th. Zelenskyy confirmed this and made the prisoner exchange the explicit justification for the Red Square decree. He said, "Red Square is less important to us than the lives of Ukrainian prisoners who can be brought home." It is a statement that contains, for anyone paying attention, a complete reversal of the power dynamics of the last 4 years. Zelenskyy is not conceding that Red Square is safe from Ukrainian reach. He is telling Putin, we could strike it. We are choosing not to because we want something you have, our people. This is not the language of a country losing a war. The ceasefire itself is real but narrow. It covers May 9th through 11th. It requires a suspension of all kinetic activity, and it has already, as of this morning, been violated repeatedly. Ukraine reported that Russian forces carried out more than 140 attacks on frontline positions overnight, alongside more than 850 drone attacks. Ukraine said it responded in kind and struck a Russian oil facility in Yaroslav, deep inside Russian territory. Russia claimed to have downed 264 Ukrainian drones targeting Moscow. The ceasefire, in other words, is operating exactly the way every ceasefire in this war has operated, as a diplomatic framework that both sides announce publicly and violate tactically, because stopping is harder than continuing when your forces are in contact across 1,000 kilometers of front line, and the political cost of appearing weak is higher than the military cost of a few more overnight exchanges. What the empty parade says about the war's direction. Set aside the ceasefire mechanics. Set aside the prisoner exchange numbers, the drone counts, the overnight violation tallies. Look at the parade. Look at what is missing. One analyst, speaking to Western media on condition of anonymity, said something that cuts to the center of what today means. He said, "There are definitely traces of paranoia in Putin's actions around the parade. I think he has been greatly impacted by the killing of Ali Khamenei. It has shown the vulnerability and possibility of such a step. Clearly, something has shifted for Putin in his perceptions." That is a striking observation. Khamenei was killed in a U.S.-Israeli strike at the very beginning of the Iran war in late February. The killing of a sitting head of state, a man who had ruled for decades, surrounded by security and layers of air defense, sent a message to every authoritarian leader watching. The protective bubble of supreme power is no longer guaranteed. And Putin watched. He watched what happened to the man who controlled the second most heavily defended capital in the world after Moscow, and then he moved his tanks away from his own parade. Not because of what Ukraine has done yet, because of what Ukraine has demonstrated it can do. In 2025, more than 20 world leaders attended the Victory Day parade in Moscow, including Chinese President Xi Jinping, who stood at Putin's side as tanks and missile carriers rolled past. That image, Xi and Putin together above the empty square, reviewing the hardware, was designed to project an alternative world order, a counter-alignment to the US-led West. This year, the parade will have no hardware. Slovakia's Prime Minister Fico, who had initially indicated interest in attending, canceled. The visual that Putin wanted, the validation, the allied presence, the rows of weapons, is absent. What replaces it is a parade of soldiers in dress uniforms marching past a reviewing stand with a jet flyover as the sole military spectacle. Credible, professional, and completely stripped of the menace that gave the parade its political meaning. The bigger picture, where the war goes from here. 3 days, that is what this ceasefire buys. May 9th through 11th, and then the war resumes, on a front line that has seen Russia making slow, grinding territorial gains in Kharkiv and Zaporizhia, while Ukraine has pushed back with long-range strikes on Russian energy infrastructure, military logistics, and now, demonstrably, the psychological infrastructure of Russian state power. The think tank Institute for the Study of War assessed this week that Ukraine may have turned the tide of Russian territorial gains. The ceasefire window gives both sides a moment to assess. It does not change the underlying military reality. Russia still has more artillery. Ukraine still has more will. And Ukraine now has the drone reach to make Russia blink at its own parade. The Trump administration is clearly hoping that the 3-day ceasefire becomes a longer-term negotiating framework, that the momentum from the prisoner exchange and the Victory Day pause becomes a pathway to a permanent settlement. Trump said in his Truth Social post that the ceasefire would include a suspension of all kinetic activity and also a prisoner swap of 1,000 prisoners from each country. He phrased it as a package, as if the two things are equivalent, as if a prisoner swap and a war's end are in the same category. They are not, but they are in the same direction, and in a war that has defied every prediction for 4 years, the direction matters. Here is what happened today. Vladimir Putin stood on a reviewing stand above Red Square and watched soldiers march past him without a single tank in formation for the first time in 18 years. Somewhere in Ukraine, 1,000 Ukrainians who spent months or years in Russian detention are coming home because Zelenskyy traded the coordinates of Red Square for their freedom. And in Washington, Trump claimed credit for a 3-day pause in a war that has killed hundreds of thousands of people and consumed 4 years, 2 American administrations, and the security architecture of an entire continent. The parade happened. The tanks did not.
And the decree that made it possible, 4 GPS coordinates issued by the president of the country Russia invaded, will be studied in military academies and diplomatic schools for a generation. Victory Day 2026 is over. Russia marked its 81st anniversary of its greatest military triumph by quietly demonstrating the limits of its current military reach. And Ukraine marked it with a document, a decree, a list of coordinates, 4 points on a map of Moscow that Ukraine chose not to strike today and that everyone in the Kremlin knows Ukraine can reach tomorrow. One question to close. If this 3-day ceasefire becomes the beginning of a real peace process, comment peace. If you believe Russia will resume full offensive operations the moment the ceasefire window closes on May 11th, comment war. Stay sharp, stay informed, and remember, the most powerful weapon Zelenskyy deployed today was not a drone. It was a decree, and it worked.